Power dynamics have a peculiar way of flipping when the lights turn on and the cameras start rolling. For 3 years, the narrative seemed set in stone, reinforced by a relentless barrage of television appearances and confident declarations. But in just 5 minutes, everything we thought we knew about the Russia collusion investigation was about to be challenged. What happens when the man who claimed to have all the answers is suddenly faced with a question he can't answer? This wasn't just another routine oversight hearing. It was a high-stakes reckoning that would leave one of Washington's most powerful figures in total silence. The atmosphere inside the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was suffocating, thick with a distinctive blend of old wood scent and nervous anticipation. High-definition C-SPAN lights flooded the space, creating a clinical, almost harsh environment, where every bead of sweat and every involuntary twitch would be captured for posterity. In this arena, there is no place to hide. Senator Adam Schiff sat perched at the elevated dais, a 64-year-old veteran politician from California who moved with the practiced confidence of someone who believed he still controlled the narrative. Despite being censured only months prior, he had requested this oversight hearing himself, seemingly driven by a thirst for political vengeance against the new leadership of law enforcement. Directly below him, appearing deceptively small at the lonely witness table, sat Kash Patel. At 44, the FBI director carried an air of unnatural calm. In front of him lay 3 manila folders, arranged with the precision of ammunition prepared for a long-awaited engagement. Patel had been in office for 6 months, but his history with the subject matter ran much deeper. He was the man who had helped peel back the layers of the very investigation Schiff had spent years promoting. The power dynamic in the room was supposed to favor the senator, yet as the gallery packed to a standing room-only capacity, the scales felt dangerously off balance. Journalists, activists, and curious citizens leaned forward, sensing that Schiff may have made a catastrophic miscalculation. The hearing opened with a routine call to order, but the formalities were quickly discarded. Schiff delivered his opening salvo with a voice that carried his trademark mixture of moral authority and rehearsed outrage. He leaned forward, attempting to establish dominance over the witness. "Director Patel," Schiff began, his tone sharp and accusatory, "there are serious concerns that you are politicizing the Federal Bureau of Investigation, using your position to pursue vendettas against critics." He demanded an assurance that Patel served the Constitution rather than a political agenda. The attack was swift, designed to put Patel on the defensive immediately. Then came the moment that shifted the room's energy entirely. Patel didn't flinch. Instead, he interrupted with a professional, polite, yet unmistakably firm countermove. "Senator Schiff, before we discuss my tenure, may I ask you a question?" The room went deathly still. This was a radical departure from the expected script where witnesses are meant to be interrogated, not to interrogate. Schiff blinked, momentarily stunned by the breach of protocol. He tried to reclaim his time, insisting that Patel answer his questions first, but Patel remained as calm as someone ordering a morning coffee. "I'll wait," Patel said with a subtle edge to his voice. "But I've been waiting 3 years to ask you this question. A few more minutes won't matter." Republican members of the committee fought back smiles, while Democrats looked on with growing confusion. The journalists in the gallery stopped typing for a moment, sensing a shift in the gravity of the proceedings. Schiff tried to plow ahead with his prepared remarks, accusing Patel of opening partisan investigations. But Patel's voice cut through the room once more, now harder and more focused. "Senator, you spent 3 years telling America you had seen evidence of Russia collusion, evidence that Special Counsel Mueller never found, evidence that Special Counsel Durham proved never existed." Patel paused, letting the weight of the statement sink into the public record. Then came the strike. "Where is your evidence, Senator?" Schiff's confident smile flickered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of doubt captured by every lens in the room. In that heartbeat, the social media landscape began to explode. The hunter had become the hunted. Adam Schiff was about to discover that investigations are a two-way street, and the man at the witness table was just getting started. Patel leaned forward, his hand resting firmly on the first manila folder, ready to expose exactly what lay beneath the narrative Schiff had so carefully constructed. Folder 1. The Ghost of the Mueller Report. The clinical brightness of the Senate Judiciary Committee room seemed to intensify as Kash Patel reached for the first of the 3 manila folders sitting on the witness table. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment where the script finally flipped. This specific folder, labeled in bold, undeniable letters as the Mueller Report, represented the first layer of a narrative that had dominated American headlines for over 1,000 days. Patel handled the document with a deliberate, slow precision, ensuring every eye in the room and every camera lens was fixed on it. Senator Adam Schiff, seated at the elevated dais, maintained a mask of practiced indifference, but the way his fingers drummed against the wooden surface betrayed a flicker of deep unease. If you've ever wondered what accountability looks like in real time, this was it. Patel did not wait for Schiff to lob another hollow accusation. He leaned into the microphone, his voice echoing with a calm authority that only comes from first-hand knowledge. "Senator, let's be very clear about where we both stand," Patel began, his eyes locking onto Schiff's in a way that made the entire room hold its breath. "I was senior counsel to the House Intelligence Committee during the height of the Russia investigation. I worked under Chairman Devin Nunes to investigate the very origins of the collusion narrative. I saw the raw intelligence. I saw the unredacted files. This means I know exactly what evidence was available to the committee, and I know exactly what you saw in those classified briefings as ranking member and later as chairman." The statement was a direct tactical strike on Schiff's credibility, effectively stripping away the classified shield Schiff had used for years to justify his public claims. Think about that for a second. While the public was being told one thing on the news, the actual documents behind closed doors were saying something else entirely. The core of the confrontation centered on what we can call the plain sight paradox. Patel reminded the room of Schiff's numerous television appearances, particularly on MSNBC, where the senator had looked directly into the camera and insisted that evidence of coordination was in plain sight. Patel paused for a moment, letting the silence highlight the sheer absurdity of the situation. If the evidence was so obvious, so clear, and so visible to a politician, how on earth did Robert Mueller miss it? Mueller, a decorated Marine and former FBI director with an unlimited budget and a team of the country's most elite investigators, had concluded his exhaustive investigation by stating it did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. "Either the most respected prosecutor in America was incompetent," Patel said, his voice dropping to a devastatingly quiet register that commanded more attention than a shout, "or you were lying to the American people on national television for 3 years. The room was paralyzed. Schiff, who usually had a quick, rehearsed retort for every critic, remained silent. His gaze dropped to his notes, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. He reached for his water glass, his hand shaking slightly just enough for the high-definition cameras to catch as he brought it to his lips. But he set it back down without taking a sip. The water remained undisturbed, a stark metaphor for the evidence he claimed to possess but could never produce. If you're watching this, ask yourself, why was he so quiet? In the gallery behind them, the atmosphere was electric, bordering on chaotic. Young activists and veteran journalists were hunched over their phones, their thumbs flying across screens as they live-tweeted the total dismantling of a political giant. The nickname Pencil Neck Pinocchio began to trend almost instantly. It was a viral masterstroke, a branding that combined a well-known political insult with the image of the puppet whose nose grew with every falsehood. This wasn't just a legal argument anymore, it was a cultural explosion. The pencil-neck Pinocchio nickname debut marked the moment the hearing shifted from a dry, procedural review into a permanent, memeable part of the American political lexicon. This is exactly why you need to stay tuned, because what Patel does next is even more shocking. Patel continued his methodical dismantling, spreading physical transcripts of Schiff's interviews across the witness table like a dealer showing a winning hand in a high-stakes game. He cited specific, documented instances on Face the Nation and CNN where Schiff had claimed there was more than just circumstantial evidence. "You told the American people to trust you because you had the clearance and the access," Patel noted, his voice gaining a sharper edge. "You used that trust as a prop in a political theater, while the official reports were telling a completely different story. You gambled with the faith of the American people, and today the bill is due." The contrast was undeniable. On one side was the legal reality of the Mueller report, a document that did not establish conspiracy, and on the other side was Schiff's media narrative of plenty of evidence. The tension arc of the hearing reached its first major peak as Patel delivered the primary "Where is your evidence, Senator?" strike. This wasn't just a question, it was a demand for accountability that had been 3 years in the making. Schiff still could not look Patel in the eye. He shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful, as the realization settled in that his qualifications and his past statements were being systematically audited by a man who knew the secrets as well as he did. The practiced composure that had served Schiff so well in front of friendly news anchors was cracking in the harsh, clinical light of the committee room. If you find this level of accountability refreshing, make sure to hit that like button right now, because we are just scratching the surface. As the weight of the Mueller findings hung over the dais like a physical fog, Patel didn't let up. He focused on a crucial psychological point: how Schiff had used the concept of classified information as a weapon to silence critics. "You hid behind the secrecy of the committee to make accusations you knew could never be verified by the public," Patel asserted. "You told the world, 'I know things you don't know,' as a way to avoid ever having to show your work." The physical presence of the Mueller report on the table served as a silent, 400-page witness to this betrayal of public trust. The investigation was public, the results were verifiable, and they stood in direct opposition to everything Schiff had told the millions of people who believed him. The gallery erupted in hushed, frantic whispers as Patel prepared to move to the next phase of his testimony. The Democratic staffers in the back row were visibly rattled. You could see them whispering frantically to one another and checking their watches, perhaps hoping for a recess that wouldn't come. They had come to the hearing expecting to grill Patel on the politicization of the Bureau, but instead, they were forced to watch their senior member get dismantled by his own documented history. The silence from the dais was deafening, a total vacuum where a defense should have been. This is a lesson for all of us. Always bring receipts. Schiff tried one more time to redirect the conversation, his voice tight with a controlled, desperate annoyance. "Director, let's discuss your tenure, not ancient history," he managed to say, trying to wave away the last 3 years as if they didn't matter. But Patel was already reaching for a second folder, one even thicker and more imposing than the first. The ancient history excuse was about to be obliterated by the findings of the next major investigation. Patel's hand rested on the second document, and he looked up at the senator with an expression that bordered on clinical pity. "We'll get to my tenure, Senator. But first, we need to finish talking about yours." The hearing was far from over, and the next revelations were about to prove that the narrative was even more fragile than anyone in the room had imagined. Patel was now ready to pull back the curtain on the very origins of the investigation that had torn the country apart. "You won't believe what's in the next folder. Stay with us, because the real hoax is about to be exposed. Folder 2. The Durham Disclosure and the Clinton Origin." The tension in the hearing room shifted from heavy to electric as Kash Patel reached for the second manila folder on the witness table. If you thought the first folder was a wake-up call, buckle up, because this one was a roadmap of active deception. If the first folder was a reminder of legal silence, this one was the smoking gun of a political operation. Patel opened the document slowly, with the deliberate poise of someone who knows exactly when to drop the hammer. He revealed the findings of Special Counsel John Durham, and the room fell into a stunned, heavy silence. Patel began to read the specific findings aloud, his voice carrying the weight of a final judgment that had been years in the making. The investigation into the Trump campaign was opened without proper foundation, Patel read, letting the words echo through the Senate Judiciary Committee room and straight into the microphones. It was based on raw, unanalyzed, and uncorroborated intelligence. He looked up at Senator Adam Schiff, whose face was now a deep shade of crimson, looking like someone who just realized the floor was disappearing beneath him. Patel leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Schiff's for even a second. "But there's something even more interesting in this report, Senator. It identifies exactly where this narrative came from." The gallery leaned in collectively, a physical wave of anticipation, as Patel delivered the ultimate blow. The entire Russia collusion story was a political invention, a fiction created and disseminated by the Hillary Clinton campaign to damage a political opponent. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a failure of intelligence or a series of honest mistakes. It was a deliberate hoax that had been fed to the FBI and then amplified by partisan actors in high places. Patel pointed directly at Schiff, asserting that the senator had promoted this baseless narrative for 3 long years, despite having access to the same classified intelligence that showed it was not true. He knew it was a lie, and he told it anyway. The exchange that followed was a masterclass in the collapse of a massive political narrative. Schiff, visibly rattled and struggling to find his footing, tried to dismiss the findings as ancient history, a classic, desperate move to move the goalposts when the facts are undeniable. But Patel wasn't having it. He didn't just stay professional, he stayed clinical. He pointed out how recent the Durham report actually was, and more devastatingly, he referenced Schiff's own official congressional censure. "This isn't ancient history, Senator," Patel countered with a sharpness that silenced the room. "This is a consequence catching up to you." As Patel spoke, the high-definition cameras zoomed in on a telltale sign of Schiff's internal state. His hands were gripping his notes so tightly that the paper was physically crushing in his palms. The practiced confidence of the man who had once ruled the Intelligence Committee was nowhere to be found. He looked cornered, and the whole world was watching. Then came the tension arc climax that left everyone in the room breathless. Patel performed a physical maneuver that was as cinematic as it was legal. He pulled out the original classified intelligence assessment from the House Intelligence Committee, the very document that started it all, and slammed it onto the table with a resounding thud that echoed like a gavel. "This is what you saw, Senator. This is the exact intelligence you had access to as chairman," Patel stated, his voice now as hard as steel. He proved, right there on the record, that the intelligence Schiff saw was identical to what Mueller and Durham reviewed, intelligence that explicitly stated there was no evidence of conspiracy or coordination. None. Zero. The contrast was undeniable. While Schiff's public memo claimed to have seen evidence of coordination, the actual classified records showed a total, echoing void. If you're at home watching this, ask yourself, how does a public servant look into a camera and see something that literally doesn't exist on paper? If you saw this report and it clearly stated no evidence, then I have to ask you again, with the whole country watching. Where is your evidence, Senator? Patel's question hung in the air like a physical weight, unanswered and, as it turned out, unanswerable. The hoax label had officially transitioned from a political talking point to a documented finding, and Schiff was left standing in the smoking ruins of a narrative he had spent his career building. Every journalist in the gallery was now typing at a frantic pace, their faces lit by the glow of laptops as they realized they were witnessing the permanent destruction of a political legacy. The power dynamic had completely inverted. The witness was now the prosecutor, and the senator was the one being scrutinized by the brutal reality of the facts. This moment of exposure serves as a critical, urgent lesson for every citizen. It's about the importance of looking past the slick rhetoric and the polished TV performances to find the actual documentation. In an era where plain sight can be used as a mask for political fiction, the only defense we have is the relentless pursuit of original sources. If you value this kind of deep accountability, you need to understand the mechanics of how these narratives are constructed and, more importantly, how they are dismantled when they meet the truth. Don't let yourself be a passive consumer of the 24-hour news cycle or the latest viral talking point. Instead, demand the receipts just as Patel did in that hearing room. This is the only way to protect the integrity of our institutions. As Patel organized the Durham materials back into their folder with methodical care, he didn't give Schiff a single second to recover or spin the narrative. He moved his hand toward the third and final folder, the one that contained the most personal and painful record of Schiff's conduct. The room was already reeling from the Durham disclosures, but the next section was about to take the hearing from a legal debate into the realm of official, permanent condemnation. Patel looked at the clock, then back at the senator, signaling that the accountability process was only entering its final, most devastating phase. The gallery was at capacity, the internet was on fire with millions of people tuning in, and the man at the witness table was about to read Adam Schiff's own colleague's words back to him. If you think it's been intense so far, you haven't seen anything yet. Stay alert, because the final blow, the one that history will remember, is about to be delivered. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications now, because you cannot afford to miss what happens when the folders are finally closed and the silence becomes a confession. This is history in the making. Folder 3, 181, Lies and the Censure Resolution. The scene in the Senate Judiciary Committee room shifted from the physical weight of the folders to the blinding, clinical light of the monitors above. This was the moment where the rhetoric finally met the record. As Kash Patel signaled the committee staff, the screens flickered to life, displaying a rapid-fire montage of the last 3 years. This was not a presentation of new evidence. It was a devastating chronological audit of Adam Schiff's own voice, a digital trail of breadcrumbs leading to a dead end. The room watched as a compilation of 181 televised performances began to play. In a staggering opening sequence of just 2 minutes, the senator's face appeared across CNN, MSNBC, ABC, and NBC, uttering the words evidence or proof exactly 17 times. 17 times in 120 seconds. The repetition was hypnotic, rhythmic, and increasingly damning. Patel stood calmly at the witness table below, letting the senator's own practiced outrage and carefully curated soundbites serve as the primary witness against him. If you've ever wondered how a narrative is built out of thin air, you were watching the manual being written in real time. The gallery erupted in hushed, frantic murmurs as the psychological weight of the pencil-neck Pinocchio branding was deployed for the second time. Patel didn't use it as a simple schoolyard insult. He used it as a clinical diagnosis of a public official who had become completely untethered from his own classified records. You could see the physical shift in the room, the journalists leaning in, the activist's eyes widening as the nickname began to stick. It transformed Schiff from a senior statesman into a viral cautionary tale, a meme that would outlast the news cycle. The dramatic arc of the hearing hit a new high as Patel transitioned from the digital screens to a single physical piece of paper, House Resolution 521. This was the official censure, the highest form of discipline the House of Representatives can impose short of total expulsion. The atmosphere turned graveyard cold as Patel began to read the specific charges into the congressional record. Whereas Representative Adam Schiff abused his trust, Patel read, his voice steady, resonant, and projecting with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. by alleging he had evidence of collusion that never existed. He paused, looking directly up at Schiff, who sat motionless. The senator was gripping an empty water glass as if it were a life raft in a storm. Patel continued through the 43 specific instances of false statements documented in the resolution. It took 12 full minutes just to read the list of documented lies Schiff had told to the American public. Think about that. 12 minutes of pure, documented fabrication. In the back row, the crisis among Democratic staffers was palpable. They were hunched over their phones, thumbs flying as they tried to draft spin that would never be enough to counter the official record. Patel remained standing, physically and metaphorically dominating the space, while the man who had once chaired the most powerful committee in Congress was reduced to a silent, censured figure. This moment wasn't just about political theater. It was about the brutal reality of what happens when public trust is weaponized for partisan gain. If you are watching this unfold, you are seeing the exact moment a legacy is dismantled in front of the entire world. For Schiff, there was no badge of honor to be found in these pages, only a permanent, unerasable record of a betrayal of trust that he still refused to acknowledge. The 181 TV performances were now anchored to 43 documented falsehoods, creating a statistical monument to the death of a narrative. This is the ultimate proof that while you can control the news cycle for 1,000 days, you cannot outrun the receipts forever. The truth doesn't care about your screen time. It only cares about the facts. As the reading of the censure reached its conclusion, the silence in the room was no longer the silence of respect. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a verdict. Patel closed the folder, the sound of the paper meeting paper echoing like a final gavel strike. His standing position emphasized the total inversion of power that had occurred over the last few hours. The folders were now a completed stack, a mountain of evidence that left the senator with no room to move, no lifeline to grab, and no words to speak. Every eye in the room was fixed on the dais, waiting for a response that seemed less likely with every passing second. The world was watching. The internet was trending #1 worldwide, and the pencil-neck Pinocchio narrative had just been signed into the history books. The air in the room felt thinner, the temperature rising as the final folder was set aside. Patel leaned forward, his hands planted firmly on the table, preparing for the final question that would define the entire proceeding and perhaps his entire career. The silent confession of Adam Schiff was already written in the tension of the room, but the world needed to hear the question one last time. As the hearing neared its absolute climax, the distinction between political fiction and documented truth became a chasm that no amount of rhetoric could cross. The next few seconds would decide whether accountability was just a fleeting moment or a permanent return to reality in the nation's capital. What we're seeing here is a masterclass in how to demand transparency. Patel isn't just arguing, he's showing his work. He's providing a step-by-step blueprint for how any citizen can hold power accountable. Document the claims, cross-reference them with the official record, and never stop asking for the proof. If you're tired of being told what to think and ready to start seeing the evidence for yourself, you need to pay close attention to this final exchange. This isn't just about one senator or one investigation. It's about the fundamental right of the American people to be told the truth by their leaders. If you believe in that right, make sure you share this, because this level of exposure is exactly what the establishment fears most. The tension was now a physical presence, a high-pitched frequency that made your ears ring. Schiff's water glass was still empty, his notes were crumpled, and his confidence was a distant memory. He had come to this hearing to destroy a reputation, but instead he was watching his own legacy vanish in the bright C-SPAN lights. Patel's gaze was unwavering, his posture like a predator that had finally cornered its prey after a 3-year hunt. The world was waiting. The journalists were ready. The cameras were zoomed in tight. Stay with us right now, because the most viral 15 seconds in the history of the United States Senate are about to happen, and once they do, nothing will ever be the same. The silence is about to become the loudest sound in Washington. If you want to see the moment the lie finally broke, don't move a muscle. This is the endgame, the silent confession and the viral aftermath. The clinical brightness of the Senate Judiciary Committee room seemed to intensify as Kash Patel reached for the third and final folder on the witness table. This was the moment where the rhetoric finally met the record, and the high-pitched frequency of tension made everyone's ears ring. Patel stood up, a physical movement that commanded absolute attention, and leaned forward until he was almost looming over the witness table. He looked directly at Senator Adam Schiff, who had spent the last 3 hours trying to destroy Patel's credibility, and asked the question one last time. "Senator, I'll ask you one final time with the whole country watching, with C-SPAN recording, and with the press here. You spent 3 years saying you'd seen evidence. Mueller found none. Durham proved it was a hoax. The House censured you for lying about it. So, where is your evidence?" What followed was a moment that will be studied in political science classes for decades. 15 seconds of absolute, crushing silence. In a room usually filled with the sound of grandstanding and political maneuvering, there was nothing but the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters. This wasn't just a pause, it was a silent confession. It was the sound of a 3-year-old lie finally reaching its expiration date. Schiff's mouth opened once, then closed. He looked at his crumpled notes, then at his empty water glass anywhere but at Kash Patel. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. The camera zoomed in, capturing the beads of sweat and the utter annihilation of a narrative. Patel nodded slowly, the silence serving as the ultimate verdict. "The silence is your answer," Patel said, his voice dropping to a devastatingly quiet register. "You have none. You never did." By that evening, the fallout was global. The clip of those 15 seconds of silence exploded across social media, racking up over 100 million views in less than 48 hours. The hashtag number "Where's Your Evidence" trended #1 worldwide, followed closely by Pencil Neck Pinocchio. The viral metrics were unlike anything ever seen for a congressional hearing. At the White House, the reaction was immediate and triumphant, while Schiff's approval ratings began a catastrophic 8-point drop in a single week. Schiff's communications team tried to release a carefully crafted statement late that night, claiming Patel's performance was a distraction, but the post was immediately ratioed on every platform. For every one person supporting the statement, thousands replied with the same 3 words. "Where's your evidence?" This event triggered a massive cultural shift that we are still feeling today. "Where is your evidence?" transitioned from a courtroom question into a universal challenge to the media and political establishment. It became the default response to any unsubstantiated claim made online. Politicians making accusations without proof and journalists reporting on unnamed sources were suddenly hit with the same demand for accountability. For Kash Patel, the hearing cemented his rise as a hero of accountability, while for Adam Schiff, the damage was a permanent stain on his legacy. He became politically radioactive even within his own party, a toxic reputation in D.C. that turned his office into a dead end for young staffers. This was justice delayed, but as the 100 million views proved, it was finally delivered in full. Think about the impact here. If you are making a claim today, you better have the receipts, or you'll face the same digital annihilation that Schiff did. This is the new gold standard for public discourse. Schiff's approval ratings didn't just dip. They cratered because the American people saw the discrepancy between the TV character and the documented truth. The ratioed responses on X and TikTok weren't just noise. They were a collective demand for honesty. When you see a leader hide behind a classified shield, remember this hearing. It proves that a single, well-placed question can bring down a mountain of rhetoric. If you're watching this level of institutional fallout, you have to realize that the rules of engagement in Washington have changed. The era of making claims without ever having to show your work is over. The American people have seen that documentation will always trump rhetoric if someone has the courage to bring the receipts. If you find this return to accountability refreshing, you need to be part of the movement that keeps asking the hard questions. Don't just follow the headlines, demand the primary sources. This is how we rebuild trust in our institutions. The practical takeaway for all of us is simple: verify before you amplify. We've seen how easy it is for a narrative to dominate the airwaves for 1,000 days, only to vanish in 15 seconds of silence. Next time you see a breaking news alert, don't just react, ask the Patel question. Hit that like button if you believe every leader should be held to this standard, and share this with someone who needs to see what real accountability looks like. Leave a comment below with the word "facts" if you're done with the spin. The hearing room may have cleared that afternoon, but the echo of the silence remained. Schiff sat motionless for several minutes after the recess was called, a defeated figure in the harsh lights. He had come to destroy, but he had been systematically dismantled by his own documented history. As the news cycle moved on to other stories, the legacy of the silent confession remained in the cultural memory as the day the stories finally ran out. For anyone else thinking of building a career on unprovable claims, the message from that Senate room was loud and clear. Facts don't care about your narrative, and eventually, the bill always comes due. The question that ended a lie is now the standard for the truth. Keep your eyes open, because this was just the beginning of the great unmasking. The era of pencil-neck Pinocchio is over. The era of the receipt is here. Stay tuned for our final deep dive into what this means for the future of the FBI and the Senate. Legacy of the lie. No regrets for the truth. The aftermath of the historic confrontation played out not in the quiet halls of the Senate, but in the rapid-fire environment of the digital town square and the high-pressure setting of the FBI press room. 2 weeks after the most viral hearing in congressional history, the dust had begun to settle, but the political landscape was permanently altered. Kash Patel walked to the podium for a routine press briefing with the same steady, professional demeanor that had unmasked a 3-year deception just days earlier. The room was packed with journalists, many of whom were still reeling from the collapse of a narrative they had helped amplify. Toward the end of the session, a reporter from a liberal-leaning outlet, looking for a moment of vulnerability, asked if Patel felt any regret for his harsh and unprecedented treatment of a sitting United States senator. Patel paused, a moment of profound calm that signaled he was standing on the firm ground of the truth. His response was immediate, clinical, and destined to become a defining quote for the era. "I don't regret bringing evidence." He elaborated with a directness that bypassed the usual Washington spin. The American people deserve 2 things from their institutions: honesty from their leaders and accountability when those leaders lie. I provided documentation of documented lies. He provided silence when asked to prove his claims. That is all that happened. There was no apology, no defensive posture, and no hesitation. It was a moment of absolute integrity that resonated far beyond the room, signaling a long-term shift in the balance of power between the bureaucracy and political actors. The long-term impact of this encounter is already manifesting in academic settings. Political science classes across the country are now using the transcript of this hearing as the ultimate case study in failed political strategy. Adam Schiff had walked into that room believing he could weaponize his position and a classified shield to destroy a witness's credibility. Instead, he was systematically dismantled by a man who simply held up the receipts. The hearing proved that rhetoric is a fragile weapon when it meets a well-organized mountain of official documentation. This wasn't just a political defeat. It was a total annihilation of a strategy built on unprovable claims. For Adam Schiff, the transformation was catastrophic. The man who once fashioned himself as a defender of democracy and a fearless truth-teller emerged from the hearing as damaged goods. He became politically radioactive. a toxic figure that even his own party members began to distance themselves from in quiet, background conversations. Invitations to high-profile hearings dried up, and his office became a dead end for ambitious young staffers who realized that being associated with a censured, silenced leader was a career liability. His legacy was no longer defined by his decades of service, but by 15 seconds of deafening silence in the face of a direct question. In contrast, the rise of Kash Patel as a hero of accountability was solidified. Public trust in the institution began to show signs of recovery, not because of a change in policy, but because of a visible commitment to the facts. The morale within the FBI saw a notable shift as line agents watched their director defend the integrity of the mission while exposing political abuse. The finality of documentation over rhetoric had been established as the new gold standard in Washington. If you've been following this deep dive, the lesson is clear. Narratives are written in ink, but accountability is written in the record. The era of the unnamed source and the classified secret used as a political prop is being replaced by the era of the receipt. As the press briefing concluded and the cameras clicked for the final time, the central lesson of the entire saga remained. We have reached a turning point where silence is recognized as a confession and documentation is recognized as the only true authority. The hearing room is empty now, but the echo of that final question still hangs over anyone who thinks they can outrun the truth. It is a reminder that in a free society, the ultimate power belongs to those who demand the facts. The career that was built on 1,000 stories was ended by a single, simple demand for proof. It all comes back to that one moment, those 15 seconds that changed everything, and the question that will follow Adam Schiff for the rest of his public life. Where's your evidence, Senator?